Hi, Lendl Calder here, and I've got a short 5-minute video to help you get ready for next Wednesday's History 132 workshop. The question raised in this video is, how do you tell a good historical question from a bad one? Let's suppose you've gone down the checklist for getting ready for Wednesday's class. You've printed out your film guide from Moodle, you've watched the film 1945 Brave New World on YouTube, you've printed out the workshop assignment number 2 from Moodle, and now you're ready to get ready for the workshop. Here's what you'll be looking at. Workshop assignment number 2 is called Questioning and Connecting. And the first part of the assignment has you reading some documents and for the record about the Cold War, and then doing some thinking about historical questions. On a sheet of paper, you're going to type up 2 questions that would be bad historical questions to ask about the documents. And then you'll type up 2 questions that would make really good historical questions to ask. How do you know the difference between a good question and a bad question? That's what we want to clarify in this video. So, to do this, I've got some questions that were asked by you guys in the last World War II unit. And with the help of Mingo, my Armadillo TA and assistant, we're going to talk about whether or not these are good questions. Alright, the first question. Was it wrong to drop the atomic bomb? Mingo, what do you think about that? Is that a good question? Yeah, I agree. That is not a good question to ask in one of our history workshops. I mean, on its own merits, it's a great question. Was it right or was it wrong to drop the bomb? But here's the deal. What do you need to answer that question? Do you need historical evidence? No, I don't think so. Because you could answer this question by quoting from a theory of moral reasoning, from the Bible, from some other sacred scripture. I mean, this is not a historical question, is it? And that's the problem. This is a history class, so we need to be asking historical questions. There's nothing wrong with asking moral questions, especially towards the end of our units. That's what we're all about on the lecture and discussion day. But in a history class, you want to start by asking historical questions of the past, not moral questions. So, you don't want to bring a moral question to class. I mean, it's the same principle. You don't want to bring a gun to a knife fight, right? So, no moral questions on workshop day. Number 2. Was the Casablanca Conference the turning point in World War II? And what would have happened, or what would have been the result of the war without this conference? What do you think of that, Mingo? Yeah, I like that too. That's a really cool question. This notion of a turning point. And it works with our documents because you could use quite a few of them to help answer it. We'll just ignore that phone call. Here's another question. During World War II, how did the role of women in the workforce change? Good question? Bad question? Yeah, I think it's a good question too. How did the role of women change? History is about change over time. Anytime your question zeroes in on change, you're on pretty good ground. That'll always be a good question to ask. How did something change? Now, I do need to caution you about one thing, though, with this question. We had one document in the Cheyenne Mayer text that really addressed this. You want to be careful about questions that are only going to take you to one document. Do you know why? When we think historically, we're looking for connections between things. We're looking for different perspectives on things. And if you only have one document to work with, you're not going to be able to do a lot of the thinking skills that make for good historical thinking, because you only have one document to work with. So be careful of that. Here's the principle to remember. The better historical questions tend to take you into more documents, not less. Alright, next. What would have happened if we didn't drop the atomic bomb. What would have happened if we didn't figure out the atomic bomb first and didn't use it when we built it? Ah, that's interesting. What do you think, Mingo? Oh, you really don't like that question. Yeah, and there's a reason why Mingo is so skeptical. This kind of question is a what if. And the technical term for this is it's a counterfactual question. Now, there are a lot of historians who think counterfactual questions don't even make it into the category of historical questions. Think about it and you can see why. What kind of evidence would you use to answer this question? The question takes us into the world of the imagination, and there's no evidence there. So if there's no evidence, it can't be a historical question, right? And other historians come back and say, no, counterfactual questions have their place and can really help us understand things. But this is my point of view. Counterfactual questions are really hard to answer. So let's leave them to the experts. I mean, don't try this kind of question at home on your own. You could get into big trouble trying to answer a question like that if you don't know what you're doing. Let's stick to just straightforward historical questions. What about this one? Why did the Allies win World War II? What do you think about that one? Mingo, would you pay attention? What do you think about that one, dude? Why did the Allies win World War II? Yeah, I'm with you. It's not a good question because it's just too dadgum big for, you could write a book on that and you only have 4 pages in a workshop essay. But the bigger problem is we don't really have evidence on it in our documents, do we? So you don't want to be asking questions we don't have evidence for, especially big ones like that. Oh, going the wrong way. Next question. How does the depiction of the roles of American women and African Americans differ between Frank Capra's film Why We Fight and the point of view of the groups themselves during World War II? Oh yeah, that's a really good question. I love it because it links so many documents together. This question was inspired when Joanna saw some interesting questions, or I'm sorry, some interesting connections. That makes a great question. What did it mean to all these different ethnic groups to come together for one purpose? Yeah, I agree. That's a good question. Questions of meaning are always interesting, and we had so many documents that could be brought together. And something I really love about this question is I have no idea where you're going to come out on it. You could come out anywhere on this, so that I'm going to pick up this paper and read it with some real interest. Were there any positive effects of World War II? Effects. Well, effects will show up later, right? After World War II. So this question takes us into the late 40s, probably the 1950s. Some of the effects of World War II don't even show up till much later, 60s and 70s. Yeah, that's not a good question, is it, Mingo, to be asking for workshop day, because it's taking us out of our chapter into later chapters. We don't have evidence for effects really yet. It's taken us out of our time period. So that would probably not be a good question to ask. Did the United States deserve to win World War II? What do you think? Yeah, deserve is a moral term. It raises questions of fairness, justice. Did the United States deserve to win? That's not a historical question. You would need to tweak it and turn it into a historical question to be able to write a good paper on that. How did technology affect World War II? You don't like that. I'm going to disagree with you, Mingo. I like this question. On the surface, yeah, it doesn't look like we have any evidence for it. But think about it. We had a propaganda film using a new technology, film and television, to promote propaganda. We've got an atomic bomb. That's obviously a technology. And other documents that we had mentioned in an offhand kind of way, technology. So maybe Kristen is thinking about that. Maybe she sees something here I didn't even see. Or maybe she's going to go and do some research and find her own documents to help answer this question. You may always do that. And if you do a good job, you're going to get some points for it and will help increase the goodness of your paper. Were women the real contributors of World War II? Is that a good question, Mingo? What do you think of that? You don't like it. Well, alright, this is a good case where poor choice of words can get you in trouble. So the take home here is, when you phrase your question, use the best words possible for expressing your meaning. The problem here is that word real. Were women the real contributors? I mean, you don't want to be arguing with people that the men who died in World War II didn't make a real contribution, right? So choose your words carefully. Was the use of the atomic bomb necessary? That's a good question. That's not a moral question. Simply asking, was the bomb a military necessity? And there's a huge debate about that, obviously, so it would be fun to read that paper. Last question. What does it mean to be an American? I'd really like to know what an armadillo would say in response to that question. It's not a historical question, on the surface. What does it mean to be an American? We could be talking about this in a literature class, in a political science class, but it is a question that history can throw some light on. So I like this as a question, and certainly the World War II documents we examined would have something to say. And if you could talk about change over time here, how the meaning of being an American has changed during World War II, that would be awesome. Well, I hope that helps you, gives you some ideas for what makes a good historical question and what would make a question not so good. When we meet in class on Wednesday, Mingo will be on hand to help us run an exercise where we'll talk about the questions you bring and whether they're good ones or bad ones. The second part of the assignment is not about questions, it's about making connections. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory, so I'll end the video here and turn you over to the worksheet, and you can just follow the instructions for drawing a concept map that shows connections. I will have a prize on Wednesday to the student who draws the most connections in their concept map. I think you'll like the surprise. And with that, I'll see you Wednesday. Have a great Labor Day holiday.